So good afternoon, and thank you for giving us your time. So my kind of talk is basically called Animal Research Talk, Time to Talk. For those of you who don't know, EARA is still a relatively newish, I think, organisation, set up in 2015. I think I came to Portugal in 2015 with the invitation of Anna Isabel at the front to do a short presentation, I think, to SPCAL members about EARA and some kind of media training. I think at the time, EARA had around 15 or 16 organizations. As you can see, the kind of EARA empire has grown. Oops. That's a good start. Sorry about that. So the EARA empire has grown to around 90 members now. 2/3 of which I think are from public research, a third are from private research. What I'm going to try and talk about today is try to explain that there's been a global change in how the research community is seeking to improve public understanding and acceptability of animal research. Much of this work began in Europe, but it's now spreading to Australia, New Zealand, America, and also Japan. I think there's a kind of a cultural zeitgeist, if you like, around openness and transparency. And I'm going to talk about really why this has happened. And a lot of it's got to do with the changing tactics and activities of those who are opposed to the use of animals in research. I'm going to explain a bit what's been taking place and give examples of some pretty good work, I think. But also to caution us to say that there's still a long way we need to go, I think, to be much more open and transparent with the public. Obviously, the ethical, philosophical debate about animal research has been around for a long period of time. This is a slide of photographs from the 19th century in the United States. The organisation that Isabel mentioned, Understanding Animal Research in the UK, its traditional name was the Research Defence Society. It sounds kind of militaristic. And that was created in the 19th century in the UK because researchers were having to defend their research from quite strong abolitionist organisations. In the UK at that time, the Royal Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Animals was set up before the Royal Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Children. So in the kind of Victorian period, the Victorians put a kind of higher moral value on animals than working class kids. And obviously, through the century, the opposition to animal research has kind of come and gone, and 30, 40 years ago, you did see in some countries, some kind of extremism against animal research. I can say that has now completely disappeared. For my sins, you may say, I often meet with the European police to discuss this issue, and they will tell me today that there's not a single researcher in the whole of Europe or a single research institution in the whole of Europe who faces the kind of nasty extremism of the past. Has completely disappeared. Not a single researcher or institution. There are plenty, though, of groups and organizations opposed to animal research, and that's what you want to talk about today. And these are the kind of groups that you will see in Europe today. These are professional organizations, completely 100% non-violent, legal, very good at what they do. And their messaging around animal research is pretty straightforward, which is that animal research is torture, and the results of research in animals do not benefit humans. Essentially, that's their argument. Obviously, your arguments, or our arguments, are somewhat more, not as nuanced as that, if you like, and can't just be reduced to little sound bites. But in saying that, they are much better at communicating their messages, I think, than we have traditionally been. They're also pretty smart at what they do. So this is a campaign which was run quite recently in the US and Europe, and it targets one particular form of research. It's called the rat swim test. It's often used in depression, looking at depression. It's not a model of research used by many people, but it's used by some, and there's a debate about it. But they've been very clever in going to universities and going to companies and essentially pressurizing them to make open declarations that they will never use this form of research, even if they weren't doing it. And once one company or once one university says, we will not do this and we don't think this is valid, they go to another company. And it causes considerable problems because the public statements by these institutions put pressure on everybody else. I'm sure most of you will be aware of this, which is the video from the research institution in Germany, LPT. It's a pretty unsavory film, and EARA made a very strong statement condemning what we saw. I've never made such a strong statement in my life before because I thought that the institution had to account for its actions, and so far they still have refused to do so. And I've been executive director of EARA now for about 5 years, and I think that I've never had so many emails and old-fashioned letters in the post about this issue. And for many people who are unsure about animal research, this video, if you've seen it, it plays to a general narrative that animal research is problematic, that the care of animals is not part of the regulatory system, and that animals are just effectively used as cheap and easy items. And everybody ultimately is damned by these kind of videos. It's also, I think, important to see that there is a real shift of animal protection activity focused at the European Union, the European Commission. And over the past year, we've seen a real shift in activity whereby animal protection groups, I'll use that term, a bit shorthand, but I'll use that term, now see their attention moving much more towards Brussels. There are a whole number of different initiatives that are flying around in Brussels. Often you can see dates for the phasing out of animal research, the phasing out of research at a certain date. The American Environmental Protection Agency recently came out with a suggestion that it may stop animal research in a particular area. That then becomes wrongly seen as a condemnation of animal research, and the EPA in the US will stop all animal research. And I think this fits into a wider kind of political landscape of change. So you have a new European Commission, you have a new European Parliament. In a number of countries, including Portugal, where you have 4 members of Parliament representing an animal rights party. You had similar in Holland. Now in Spain, the new so-called left-wing government, they now have a position which is hostile to animal research. In the UK, the Labour Party has effectively shifted its vision towards an animal protectionist point of view, and is flirting, if you like, with animal protection groups. This comes at a time, I think, also when industry is becoming much more reluctant to make a strong case for the use of animals in drug efficacy safety testing. And much more their kind of language is couched in terms of kind of animal welfare and 3Rs. Now obviously animal welfare and 3Rs are important, but at a time when there's a stronger abolitionist move, I think the research community needs to make a stronger case for the use of animals in research. Not just in Europe. So this is a campaign that some of you may know called White Coat Waste in the United States. And this is a very interesting campaign. So this is a campaign by those who are against animal research, want it to end. And it's targeted on a particular audience, which is conservative Republicans who don't like paying taxes. And the argument is that your taxpayers' money, or the money you're being asked to pay, is going to frivolous, ridiculous, useless research activities. So it's a very smart campaign, and it plays not to a kind of a liberal audience who may be unsure about research. It's about your taxes paying for research which cannot be ethically or scientifically justified. they're also very smart at what they do. So this, as some of you may know, this slide, this is of a tweet which came a few years ago in the United States, and it looks pretty gruesome. It looks like the industrial slaughter of animals, when in fact it's veterinary students who were brought into a hospital in the United States after the police found an old lady who died, and the house was overrun by hundreds and hundreds of cats, like a Hollywood movie. And the cats were completely dirty and filthy, and so the cats were brought into this veterinary hospital. They've all been anesthetized, they've all been cleaned, spaded, about to be adopted. But it's presented as some kind of Holocaust of cats. So they are pretty smart at what they do. And I think this tweet was retweeted 5,500 times, which is a lot. I mean, if one of my tweets is retweeted 10 times, I'll buy myself a drink. You know, I feel I'm pretty popular. So countless people would have seen this. And again, that will be their kind of vision of animal research. I think we also face a trust challenge. And I think in a number of countries, you can see that belief and support for these animal research is, I wouldn't say at a crisis level, but it's a worrying situation. And I'll just pick one example, which is Belgium. So a couple of weeks ago, an opinion poll was published. It was carried out by an animal protection group, or a company for an animal protection group. And as you can see, the issue of animal welfare and the care of animals was really high on the kind of priority list of people, higher than other issues to do with taxation or what have you. Significantly high proportions of those polled didn't really support these were primates in research or dogs in research, and actually believe that those involved in animal research should pay kind of higher taxes. And from these findings, they're trying to put pressure on the regional authorities in Belgium to bring these into their kind of legislative program for the next 5 years. And they've already put somebody in place, a Minister of Animal Welfare, when in the past this was given to somebody who had 1,000 jobs. This is now their job. And this is somebody who is an avowed supporter of finding a date to end all animal research. And in the US, we see something like this. So this is an interesting opinion poll. Myself, I find opinion polling very hard now to use to back up my arguments. But I struggle to find another way of trying to give a sense of how society feels. I mean, if you look at opinion polling, most opinion polls said that Trump wouldn't win the American election. He won. Most opinion polls said that Brexit wouldn't happen. Brexit happened. If you follow Australian, well, it hasn't happened yet, but it probably will happen. If you follow politics in Australia, over the last 4 years, I think 54 opinion polls said that the current Australian government would not win the election. 54 out of 54, and they won the election. So there's something not particularly right with opinion polling these days, and I'm not sure what it is, but I struggle to find a way to say where we're at. But this, even saying that, this is an interesting opinion poll. So this is one carried out by a company in the United States for the last 18, 19 years. And they've asked the same question for 19 years, which is it morally acceptable or morally unacceptable to use animals in research? And as you can see, except for a year or so ago, the two kind of lines are coming together. So the gap between those who think it's wrong or right, morally wrong, to use animals in research is narrowing and narrowing. And the prediction is 2023 it'll come together. Now, I'm not here to say that's going to happen. I'm not here to say that the US is Portugal and what have you. But traditionally in Western societies, when the political divide becomes so close, that is traditionally when politicians begin to act. Whether it's same-sex marriage, whether it's abortion, whether it's smoking bans or what have you. And I'm not saying the American government are going to ban animal research in 2023. That's not going to happen. I'm 100% sure of that. But that's when you see something is going on. And I think we need to get on top of it. So the EARA view is that given all this shifting tactics of animal opposition groups and towards legal campaigning, communication campaigns, reputation campaigns, that the view that we can just like close our eyes and hope things are going to get better, cross our fingers, stick our head in the sand and hope things will pass us by really doesn't really work. And in the past, when you might have had extremist groups, you might think twice about being more public about the research you do. Even then, I would say that that would be a mistake. But today, when in many countries, there's often a one-sided negative narrative about animal research, the research community opting out of that and hoping things will just improve by themselves really, will not work. And in far too many countries, the public hears in this ear that animal research is torture, that the results of research in animals don't benefit humans, that it's a waste of taxpayers' money, and in the other ear, they don't really hear a great deal. And I think that we need to understand that, and we need to be part of this cultural change to improve that. So, how can we do it? I'm just going to quickly run through 2 or 3 ways I think that we can do this. So, the existing legislations that govern animal research in Europe offers us all opportunities, I think, to improve openness in animal research. I'm going to talk about a few things that we've done and that you can do. One is about how society understands animal use statistics. How do we use something which is a mandatory thing? Countries have to do it. I know the Portuguese are somewhat behind sometimes in releasing their statistics, but it's a mandatory thing through the EU legislation. Secondly, talk a bit about something that EARA has been doing recently, which is to do with non-technical project summaries, a working group, and then some work that EARA has been doing on greater openness. So the statistics are something which traditionally has been an issue which animal research science communicators have avoided like the plague. So it's mandatory, each country every year must release the statistics of animals used. Normally what happens is that on a Monday morning, the competent authority, Portuguese, French, Spanish, will just dump information on their websites. So it'll have a report on the statistics of the previous year. Animals used, levels of severity, numbers of procedures, and that's usually about it. And if you're an animal protection group, it's like your birthday, your Christmas, your lottery have come on the same day. You wake up and you have all these examples of animal torture, all these examples of frivolous, ridiculous research, cruelty to animals. And the scientific community just says nothing. Doesn't say a word. Which has meant that in many countries, the media run with what they have, which is the stats and the negative comments from the protection groups. And it's been a terrible story in many countries. In the UK and in a few other countries, what's happened in the last few years is the scientific community have basically grabbed this back by reacting to the release of the statistics, by talking to journalists before the statistics become public, usually the day before, providing context information for them. And it's meant that the statistics are no longer seen as just a negative thing, there's a kind of balanced narrative. And it means that the media have more information to go on. And it means that the presentation of the statistics are much more beneficial to the scientific community. This year, the European Commission are going to release 2 pretty significant reports. One is statistics for 2015, 2017, European-wide. They're also going to release a report which will outline animals that have been bred in research facilities and not used. So maybe the wrong genotype or what have you. And often, not always, often that means that the animals are killed. So you can see that these are going to be 2 reports with pretty kind of sensitive information. And EARA thinks this is a great opportunity for the research community as a whole to help improve public understanding. So when the reports are finally released, EARA intends to communicate context to the statistics as far and wide as possible. We've created a database of the top 5 or 10 journalists in every European country. You know, without even knowing the statistics, you know that 97% or what have you are going to be rats, mice, zebrafish. A small number will be dogs, primates, cats. So we need to contextualize that, and we need to provide messaging. So we're going to do a significant media release, but also do media releases which are focused for each country, with case studies of examples and quotes to go along with it. And we intend to provide the scientific media and the public media in the whole of Europe with information, which means that they won't just go with negative stories from the activists. Social media is clearly an important issue on this, and so we're going to develop hashtags, we're going to develop infographs, and ensure that, you know, Twitter, Facebook is going to be used. This is some examples of some of EARA partners of work they've done already. So the one on the left is from Understanding Animal Research, Jacot, French group, and on the far right is an institute in the UK. These are kind of draft EARA infographs, what we're going to be working on to make sure that, you know, we make them in an appealing kind of way. EARA's kind of developed a number of kind of Twitter channels. I think we have like 12 or 14 now, EARA language Twitter channels, which are researchers in all these countries who will put out in their native languages this information. I've been told to hurry up. Non-technical project summaries, I'm sure you know what these are. They're often something which are hard to find and even more harder to understand. But they're an opportunity for greater openness. So EARA brought together a working group, including industry, academia, and animal protection groups, the RSPCA, to produce a guidance document which will go out with a new template put out by the Commission. National transparency agreements, the third and last thing. This is what EARA has been doing in a number of countries. In Spain, in your country, you now have a transparency agreement. Belgium will have one in a couple of weeks, and in Switzerland. These are opportunities for the research community to come together on a set of principles to agree how they will publicly improve opportunities for animal research. So I've run through the quick stuff, now the not so good stuff, 3-4 minutes. So that's the good stuff. You know, I think in a number of countries, a number of institutes, they're moving towards greater openness. However, we still have somewhere to go. So this year, EARA carried out, in collaboration with the European Commission, a survey looking at how institutions in Europe, how open are they about animal research. The Commission sent out our survey to the competent authorities. They sent it out to their institutions in their countries. And we got back feedback from around 1,500 institutions. So we can tell us now where we stand in terms of best practice. So quickly, 3 good examples, or not so good examples. So one of the questions was, does your institution have a web statement which explains the research you carry out? 65% of the 1,500 do have nothing. And these are in the main publicly funded research institutions who take taxpayers' money and don't say what they're doing. Does your website carry any information that potentially help the researchers understand, or the public understand what you're doing? Do you challenge some of the myths that, you know, researchers can go out into the woods and get a squirrel and just do research on it? That's all about cosmetic testing. It's all about primates and dogs. No. 80% of these institutions have nothing, not a single thing. So you go to them and you don't learn anything at all. What you do learn is they're being secret. The last one, imagery. You know, if you're bored one night and you're in a country that's not your own, and you're in Finland, type in animal research image in Finland and see what images come up. 9 times out of 10, the images are negative images of animal research, and they're not even from Finland, they're from somewhere else. You know, the animal protection groups own the images that the public see. So how do we challenge that? Do we have images? No. 77% of institutes in Europe that we've come across have no images at all on their website. Which first of all means their websites are dull. Words, that's all there is. But it means that the protection groups are the ones that people believe have honesty on images. And it's actually even worse. Of the 23% that do have photographs, a quarter are bought off the internet. So it's not even their own images. It's some sexy man or some sexy woman with a mouse in their hand, you know, like George Clooney with a if you think he's sexy, with a mouse in his hand. It's Hollywood. I mean, you might as well not do it. It's a lie, it's deceit, doesn't help anybody. So, to help this series produces Communications Handbook, which is available to our members. It helps them put in place a communication strategy and animal research. And I've talked too long, I'm really sorry, but I'll finish now and I'll take any quick questions.
Is there any measurement of this at this moment of, so this change in policy of like, so all these things that you showed in the end, I think it's the only way to go. Like the strategy that we had before didn't work.
Sure.
And it's not even acceptable, I think. But there should be a way of making sure that this strategy is working. So do you have a plan for knowing if these actions are working, and what are they?
Yeah, it's a good question. So one thing is that we're going to redo the EARA survey in February or March next year. And so we now have a baseline of where we think we're at in terms of openness. So hopefully, fingers crossed, when we do the survey next year, then we will see that there's been some kind of progress. But also I think EARA and others have to engage politically much more in Brussels. We have to find new MEPs who understand the importance of not just animal research for drug development, but for basic research and better understanding. So we need to identify life science champions, or whatever you want to call them, MEPs who are prepared to be publicly associated with our work. So there's a lot that needs to be done.
Other questions? Yes.
So Kirk, you mentioned that many institutions are already sending out reports on their numbers or on their figures of the animals used, and simultaneously they are sending out media releases. So are journalists picking up those stories and writing about?
Yeah. So it's a bit sporadic. So for example, I can't think of an institution in France, for example, that does that. But I can think of many in the UK, in Germany and elsewhere. And what happens now is that because in certain countries there's been a greater move towards openness, so when the media are approached by animal protection groups who make these claims about animal welfare, that this is kind of frivolous research, not everywhere, but in those countries and where those institutions are more open, the journalists now are less hesitant to believe what the animal protection groups say, because they know they can get a quote, they can go to the research institution and talk to them. Whereas in the past, because the research institution didn't want to talk to the media, they only had one view, which was with the animal protection groups. And, I know many institutions now have put their statistics on their websites, and nothing has happened. Because people know that the animal research is taking place there, and it's just another example of openness. So it's a bit of a win-win. And also you don't have to answer freedom of information inquiries, because the animal statistics are already on the website.